Why should people listen to this conversation, Tommy?
I think this conversation that we had affects everybody in the entire sport, from player to observer to tournament director to local Roundnet organization coordinator to any other role in the sport. I think we all want to have a say in the future of the sport we all play, and work hard for as athletes and as competitors, and we want to see it turn into something great and maintain its core values.
Right. Today, I'm so excited to talk to an old friend, Tommy Drake. Tommy, you said you wanted to share a little bit about how you got into Roundnet, where you've kind of been, and where you are now. So the floor is yours.
So I first played Roundnet in 2017, probably on my 17th birthday, when my mom bought me my first pro set. And I played in one friends tournament in 2018, and then I didn't play competitive until coming to NC State University in 2019, where I got into the club there at NC State, which was still kind of on the ground. But luckily, with some support, we were able to pick it up off the ground, and I served as president for a little while. And that was really what got me into competitive Roundnet and traveling for tournaments. That's what really sparked my enthusiasm for the sport, because I wasn't going to go Division I in any sports. So I was like, hey, here's this thing that I could get decently good at pretty quick. So that's how I got into the competitive scene. Met a lot of friends through the sport, traveled to a lot of places. And I studied abroad in Spain in 2022, and that's when I got to see the European scene of Roundnet, which is just incredible. And I was lucky enough to be an assistant coach for the Spanish national team at 2022 Worlds, which I was mostly there for moral support, but it was very fun. And then nowadays I've kind of stepped away from playing super competitively with graduating college and all, and a full-time job and other stuff. But hopefully I can get back into it eventually. But nowadays I'm whenever I am involved, I like observing and serving on the International Roundnet Federation Observing Committee. Yeah,
a lot of different journeys to like jump into that could be like wholly fledged conversations. But I know something we've talked about offline a bit has been kind of like graduating college, you played this thing and you got pretty good at it, and now like what's next? Like, can you keep playing forever? Do you work on stuff? And both of us have a really strong passion for observing and officiating, so I know we see that in our futures. But even like bigger than just the two of our interests is something like where does Roundnet fit into the average person's day to day over a long term? Not necessarily as a like a profession, but maybe as a thing that they're part of the community and they contribute to in some way. As the word volunteer is probably the simplest way to think about it, but ultimately the sport is really small, really young, and it needs a lot of love and care. So I'm curious, like where you sit on right now. You're doing these officiating things. If there's any other aspirations you have for it, and just how you think about doing more Roundnet activity, even if you're not playing.
Yeah, I have been in the sport long enough to know that I'm never going to completely leave the sport. I think anybody who spends 5 years on this sport that, doesn't generate it doesn't generate a whole lot of revenue for the people who commit a lot of time and effort into it. If they've been in it for that long, means they're probably going to stick around and see what happens. But I would say, I'm not opposed to getting back into playing more competitively, but I also think that some people, the best thing that some people can contribute to the sport is playing and evolving the skill set of the game and opening up new windows in that area, because we can't have tournaments and volunteers without the players. We need that as like the core of it, I feel. But at the same time, we can't have players be satisfied and ultimately stay in the sport for a long time without structure. And that comes from the volunteer side of things. So they have to coexist. And I would say right now, if it's not already obvious, we don't have enough people and support on the structure side of things. So that's an area that I'm most excited to see evolve in the future and be a part of, because I don't necessarily have the time to be all in on playing competitively sometimes. And I think it would be awesome to be a part of the evolution of the growth of the sport overall, and put in the structures that maybe bring it to the Olympics one day, maybe not in our lifetime, but doesn't matter if you really finish the race as long as you were part of it. And you might not even see what the end goal of the sport is, but I think it's cool to be a part of, because it's such a small community that any action is big action, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, that last soundbite is absolutely true. And finding that internal motivation to take on a hobby, whether it's Roundnet or anything else, is pretty much the only way that you can be doing Roundnet over a long period of time. Otherwise, there isn't really the external ROI that like we formerly would see. And I wanted to just flag, you mentioned you're volunteering with the IRF. I think sometimes people maybe wonder like, oh, like they must have so many volunteers, this all looks so legitimate, and it's like already set up and finished. They maybe don't appreciate how young and developing and new a lot of things are. What advice would you give to somebody who's maybe unsure of how they can contribute or where they contribute? Like, how did you get involved with observing and figure out that you could volunteer with the IRF?
Yeah, so I think I realized I could be a part of something like that when I was abroad and I was going to all these European tournaments, and I was observing over there like all the time, because I was just I was the American premier player, and it was more like I wasn't even a certified observer yet, but I just kind of understood the rules a little. I understood most of the rules, and so that's how I got into it. But as soon as I realized, like, oh wait, there's a lot of room for growth on the aspect of observing guidelines and legitimizing officiating, because every single time I observe, still today, there's something that comes up that needs to be clarified. There's maybe an answer for it already, but it's not always obvious in that moment to all of the observers. And I think I liked the idea of spreading awareness of that, because to the point I said before, players don't stay in the game for a long time if they don't feel like playing it is legit. And they will never feel like it's legit if they're in a finals matchup and half the points result in a redo. So I thought it was I never really considered getting into refereeing, but I thought it was a good way to get involved on a global scale with the sport.
Yeah, that's fair. I'll just say, I can plug, like, there's lots of different places where people are needing help. So just say if you want to get involved, like for Tommy, like people are just coming up to him asking him to observe. But there's probably a way that if you're in your local community, if you're at a regional event, and you can just raise your hand and see like what needs helping. There's probably something that needs to be helped. Like we're very far from perfect in a lot of the things because it's such a young sport. So don't feel like you can't raise your hand is, I guess, what I want to just push.
Yeah, and on that, I'm not even I'm far from the most experienced observer in the sport, but I'm still jumping in to try and support the cause. So like anybody can really do it. You just have to put your hand up, pretty much.
I would argue you might be pretty close to one on this call right now, but yeah, the thing I actually say about observing and other things that people feel like when someone tells me they're newly a certified observer and they're anxious about observing a match, is it's the same as playing Roundnet or running a tournament or any other skill, whether it's in Roundnet or otherwise, is you're not going to get better without getting the repetition. So You need to just adopt a growth mindset that you might not be very good at it the same way that the first time you played, you probably had really poor touch. And even if you had good touch, you improved on it. So everybody starts at a different level and everybody has the room to grow and improve. I'm curious, we talked about you feeling like you wanted to stay in Roundnet for a long time. What was kind of that aha moment when, through your journey in college and going abroad and coaching Team Spain and all this volunteering with observing now, where did you feel like you've been around the sport long enough that you want to stay around the sport? And did anything particular lead you to that conclusion?
Yeah, definitely. I would say at a high level, I think everybody needs something. Everybody needs a hobby to be at least somewhat involved in as an adult. And I got into Roundnet before Roundnet was kind of most of my personality in college. And so when I got out, I was, I took a step back for a little bit, but I think the reason why I chose Roundnet is because it's something I dedicated so much time to, so much effort to, that I already feel like I had to step up in making that my project, for lack of a better term, for the rest of my free time in my life. And I liked the idea of taking something that isn't where it wants to be yet and helping it get there, because it'd be a different story if I just coached rec basketball or refereed rec basketball at a, non-global scale. I think there's huge room for opportunity. And I think that's the most important part of it and it's not for selfish reasons. It's not to get anyone's name out there. It's because you can do a lot for the sport and there's always something to do. And so I was like, I'm never going to run out of things to help. And I also really enjoy playing it. Very fun. So I can have both aspects of a hobby in one thing, which is helping grow the sport itself and also having physical activity and sport. So I guess that's why I chose Roundnet. But
okay, I can fully relate to both the physical outlet and also there's no shortage of things to do. Just time to maybe pursue like the fun things that help contribute or grow stuff. So you mentioned you're doing all this volunteering, all this playing. Just taking a step back and thinking about, we're running this race, trying to build the sport. In your estimation, are we doing enough as a community to get where we want to go for Roundnet?
I would say I'll say it's hard to know because it's a very young sport, and I know that's such an overused term, but I feel like we could compare this sport to other sports that are roughly 10 years old and see how we're faring. And we'd probably be doing pretty good. You can compare to other sports that are now very big and look at them when they were 10 years old and maybe see like, okay, where we're at on the growth scale. But how it feels very subjectively, as a player and just someone involved, is it's done a good job getting where it is now, but I feel like we don't have the resources and the structure to get where we're trying to go maybe in the next 5 years even. Like I feel like there's a lot missing to move the sport forward from this day on.
Okay, so in the next few years for pushing Roundnet forward, obviously we need people to do the work on growing the sport, but also we will just need funds to invest in tools, equipment, and hopefully, being able to maybe pay people so that it's not a fully volunteer-run sport. Which do you think is going to be harder to get access to? More time versus more money for Roundnet?
Well, I think if you look at just time first, I feel like that's just a numbers game. Well, they're both numbers games, but if you look at time, if we double the amount of people involved in the sport player-wise, naturally there's hopefully going to be X amount of more people that are willing to volunteer for the sport. So that's just a numbers game. So, I mean, the question on that is, does that solve anything? Does more time by more people solve everything, or is there still something missing? And that's why I think money is probably the most important thing. And it might also be the harder thing, the more difficult thing to achieve. It could be something quick, like maybe an angel investor comes in and decides that they want to make Roundnet their investment and put money into the sport, and we can take it from there. But I would say money is the more difficult thing to achieve, given that everybody that plays in the roughly 18 to 26 age range, likely not a billionaire. So,
well, I think this is like a very, like, I'm also not sure exactly how this would shake out, but I'm super curious. Like you mentioned, like a billionaire maybe wants to come in and just be an angel investor and invest, right? The idea that they would make a monetary return on it, as opposed to right now, no billionaires playing Roundnet that we know of, or at least that like are regularly playing it, right? If you're listening, you can drop me a DM. But like everyone that's playing Roundnet, we are, like, generally speaking, spending our time and money, like putting it in as a hobby. And like that's what you do for hobbies, right? You enjoy something, you spend money on it, you get out the, you know, all the internal validation, all the internal rewards that we talk about. Building a community, those are great things. You know, feeling fulfilled and like just getting active and whatnot. So in order for any investment, whether it's from smaller groups or from a single angel investor, to get any sort of return, there would need to be some value in the sport. I'm super curious for you to bring it back to a question. Like, how much do you think Roundnet players right now value Roundnet? And I have a follow on or two, but like, do we actually value Roundnet right now, or is it just a fun thing we're doing?
I would say it is an extremely fun, passionate thing that we're doing that we wish could be. Right. We believe in it enough that we wish it could be.
Right. We want for it to have some monetary value. And then like the related follow up is just like, are we doing things right now? Again, we don't know how to do like a meta analysis, but do you think generally we are doing things right now to make it something that is more attractive for an investor, like making Roundnet a more valuable thing in how we build the infrastructure, how we support our communities? Or do you think we are like, you know, steady state, like not making it any more or less valuable, or are we making it less valuable?
I would say as long as there's a competitive league, we're not hurting anything. I think that's the crux of it. I think if we have that, that's the part that we want people to come in and invest in.
I would say also the way you mentioned the numbers game of just like, if we're getting more people playing Roundnet, then Roundnet is more valuable, because like any audience that you can market to, even if again it's small and young, like we keep saying, if it is making forward progress, then it is becoming more valuable. How universally would you say the Roundnet community right now values the building and sustaining and growing of Roundnet versus just the fun day-to-day, I just play my tournaments to have a fun time?
I would say from the top to the bottom, we don't, and just looking at it from a people perspective, the people putting in the most time and effort into growing the sport, we don't appreciate and value enough the effort that goes into that, just to keep it afloat. Like, you know, a lot of people go to tournaments, and not calling anybody out at all. It's just, I feel like a lot of people go to tournaments without appreciating the effort that was put into putting on that tournament. And you know, they're there to play and have fun. They care deep down about the growth of the sport, but a lot of people aren't willing to get involved in the behind the scenes and the community building and the volunteering. Like, just becoming a certified observer is such a simple thing, but it often goes pretty underappreciated by a lot of players. Some people really appreciate observers, good ones, but you have to earn it, and so I think a lot of people don't fully commit to it. But that's off topic.
Well, I think it's related,
I
right? I think it's like in a sense that like we do value, like one really salient example to this conversation is people value an observer that has put in the energy and time to not just read the rules and get certified and understand the officiating guidelines, but also then get practice of observing their pickup games, observing a local tournament, and then steadily observing at higher levels until all of a sudden they feel comfortable and players understand that, and players can see that they look comfortable observing anywhere, right? And in that same way, that's one almost like asset to Round, right? Every person who's good at something in Roundnet, whether it's observing, playing, or anything else, is adding to like Roundnet's ability to do all this cool stuff. But we maybe don't, like my view on it, at least to answer the question I'm trying to pose, is I don't think we actually value as a community the work that goes into things, sure, but more generally, like the idea that those things don't just happen. Like you don't just pop out and know how to observe well, or you don't just pop out and know how to hit a reverse cut serve. That there's all this work going into all these things, and if we want Roundnet to be bigger and better, we have to not only appreciate those things, but also looking forward, try to make more of those things or more different things like it happen. And that's not just with like appreciation. It's probably going to have to be with, like we're talking about, the time or the money.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it sometimes it looks gloomy and it looks like it could be in a tough spot because, I mean, just calling you out, like if you stopped doing everything that you do, I feel less confident in some growth areas of the sport. Just as an example, like there's the fact that there's a handful of people that are doing so much for the growth of the sport, and not that it's about this, but the reward in return, it's not always sustainable, and so I think the fact that it's standing on very few pegs right now, but I think it is just a numbers game, and
yeah. Well, first I'll just say I appreciate that. It's not why we're talking about this, but yeah, I guess like people appreciating people is like that happens. Something just to reflect a bit on that I've acknowledged is knowing that when I started doing all these things, it was just like, oh, this is a fun thing to do. Oh, that's a fun thing to do. And all of a sudden I'm not just doing these fun things now. Like you mentioned, it's maybe more like I have these commitments to serve the community in different ways. But looking back and forward on it, a really important word, like you mentioned, is sustainability. So it's not necessarily that you or me or anybody else has to do the things that we're doing, but it's the idea that if the entire infrastructure of a sport is dependent on, effectively right now, Spikeball hires a couple of people and fewer still that can support Roundnet full time. A couple other people are, maybe able to do it full time in some capacities, whether it's running events and other things like that. But by and large, it is volunteers who are doing things and keeping the sport together. It pretty much depends on not necessarily like the goodwill of those people, but just like their ability to sustain themselves and not burn out so much that they can't be effective. And I know in my experience, I've been more effective and less effective given times. Sometimes I just have to like put a plate down. But looking forward, the reason I think I'm super passionate about this topic is I want to work on Roundnet long term. I haven't figured out if that means I need to be a volunteer long term and doing less, or if I should work full time in some capacity long term, and there's the funding to support me doing that. But just that someone's got to be supported doing working on Roundnet. And I think we've talked about that. I don't know if you remember, we talked about this actually back in, I think it was Toulouse, very late one time. But just that concept, right? That like someone has to be working on Roundnet, and not that they need to be paid so much, but they probably need to be paid enough that they like can commit to doing good work for a sustainable amount of time.
Yep. One more thing I'll add to this conversation is it's actually a positive thing, because we've seen Spikeball, the company, commit less and less resources to the Spikeball Tour Series, just gradually. Um, but the past 2 years, we have seen individual, local Roundnet organizations almost like besides the majors, all of the challengers have been run by local Roundnet organizations and have done pretty well. And so
Yeah,
that
in the US.
is, that is all people stepping up and volunteering to essentially run the tour series. So I think that's a good sign. But I will say there's still the aspect of it where it needs financial support. Um, it can sustain itself with the people that are in it, but how big it is and how successful and how much commitment they get from players, I feel like is going to be dependent on money.
Yeah, I at least can speak for myself that I like put together 2.5 to 3 challengers myself last year,
Mm-hmm.
and it was unbelievably tiring and taxing, and not something I would ever do in that capacity again. And I think in the same way that we talk about like people not feeling appreciated, the positive thing that I think comes out of all these things and how I think Rounded actually needs to take like 1 or 2 steps back so it can take like a giant leap forward is not necessarily like, I'm not saying I should be appreciated. Again, it's a very weird thing. Looking at like my involvement around it, the MO has been, hey, what's the thing that could be helpful? Do it for a long time. Don't stop doing it. Now do another thing. So
Mm-hmm.
so it's like a little self-serving to say, oh, I think I should be getting paid for running a tournament or observing as 2 examples. But bigger picture, more and more people saying, oh, things maybe are doom and gloom because all these resources may be getting decreased from Spikeball and maybe some players are burning out. I think having a more clear eye and talking about Roundnet in this capacity is really important so that more and more people can understand what's needed. And I would hope, I'm cautiously optimistic that it would mean you're wanting to get galvanized and go contribute and build around it because it does need our work. It does need our energy. And that's not to say that you can't make money doing Roundnet. It's just that it's not going to just happen magically, and being really, I think, clear about the work you're doing, whether it's in your local community or running a bigger tournament, that's real work and that should be valued is hopefully really like lukewarm tape for people to accept that like we need to have a better understanding of not just wanting to keep players in the sport, but wanting to keep anybody that is adding to the sport in, traditional or non-traditional ways. Otherwise, Roundnet is just as big and as good as the people who can afford to not only like do it for fun, but also in some ways like spend their own time and like literally volunteer their capacities, their expertise beyond not a reasonable measure, but yeah, I think in some ways like kind of pushing themselves too hard to just volunteer for again, not nothing, because if you and I enjoy it, that's great, but doing it in a way that's not sustainable at the end of the day if it's so much work falling on just a few people.
Yeah. I think if you compile all of the different skill sets that we have as individuals in the Roundnet community, we have some very talented people that could provide a lot of value to the sport. And maybe they're just doing something else for the sport right now. Maybe they're at the top of their competitive game, and that's the best thing that they can contribute to the sport right now. They should do that thing. But I can't imagine that there would be um, a top pro player, for example, that would just never do anything with the sport ever again after stopping playing. So I think you're right. It's important to keep people in the sport, even if that's in a different capacity than they imagined, because there's a rich history of the sport, even though it's young. And I mean, I've learned a lot from people who have been in it since the beginning, and there's still so much more to figure out what needs to be done. And if we just compound the people and keep them increasing, and we maintain the people that we have, it might go slowly, but it'll keep growing.
I like that framing of it is like the Roundnet community does have a lot of potential energy, like so
Mm-hmm.
many skills and abilities that aren't being used, and it's almost like we need to not necessarily unlock them so much as like see what happens when we start like throwing in like drops and little bits of ability from more and more people.
Yeah.
Because I've been so impressed by like the people I've gotten to work with, and I'm always really excited to try to get to work with more people on different projects.
Yeah.
Like,
Another cool thing I thought of is there's people out there that are not even in the Roundnet community yet that are going to contribute more, but like possibly more than you ever will. Definitely more than I ever will. So like there's so many people that can contribute to the growth of this sport. So I think, we need more people in the sport, going back to the people thing. But there's a lot of potential still out there if people commit to volunteering in their communities, whatever that looks like. Maybe just organizing tournaments in your city. I know there weren't, I was the first premier player at NC State. Now there's 10. And we have, since I left, the club has grown a lot. So people I don't even know, I have not even met yet, are playing Roundnet because the club started 5 years ago. So it's just a cool thing.
Yeah, I totally hear that. I think like not only is that like a cool thing to have like some sort of connection to work you've done, but also just big picture for Roundnet. Like some of the work we're doing will be enjoyed by other people. The same way you said, like we're not going to necessarily finish the race, but yeah, more and more people. Like we're serving more than just like the communities that are currently active. Like we're trying to set things up so that it's easy and exciting to join and get started in Roundnet. And I definitely try to focus on that, especially like locally. Try to make spaces a place that more and more people want to come, like have a good time and get all the same things out of it that you and I do.
Yeah.
Do you have any other...
I think the reason why I got in and I stayed in the sport is the community. So
yeah, having that place to belong is huge. I know you said you might want to grill me on some things. I don't know if any questions came to mind.
So I guess a good question for you, since you've worn a lot of hats, is what roles do you think we need more people working on or working in? What volunteer activities need more attention to grow the sport?
I'll come in with a pretty cold take, but I'll do it in a hot way. Roundnet has way too much main character energy, right? Like you and I, we both got started. A lot of people get started and play Roundnet where they're like, hey, this is kind of small, I could be pretty good at it. And we kind of look inward at ourselves and like need to assert like some dominance and feel like really important. And it's good to feel important. It's good to get external validation. But I think we need way more servant leadership. And so the big problem that we have right now is anybody that might be interested in doing a little more Roundnet stuff is very infrequently doing it, not thanklessly necessarily, but they're not doing it in a way that is just like building a block. They're maybe trying to build a whole puzzle. And so without trying to like, I think I struggle with this too also. Like I literally like volunteer on the USA Roundnet board. So definitely a little bit of like main character energy there that I try to like dispel and really push back into saying like how like the way I operate is how can I take in as much information from as many different places as possible and serve the US community? Because yes, I have a lot of experience, but it's not just what I want for the US, it's what everybody wants, and then trying to navigate that and do that in a sustainable way. So to get back to the question of what's the most important thing that anybody or everybody can do, or that's the most like underrated right now, far and away it is growing Roundnet locally. I've played Roundnet in a lot of places. I would submit the claim, I think I've played in more tournaments by unique tournament directors than almost anybody ever. So I think I've just seen so many different types of things, and everywhere I go I like to ask people like, what do you do in your local community? Like the question of what does NC State do for pickup? What does practice look like? And there's very few people. There are a lot of people out there, but relative to the size of Roundnet, there's very few people who are going to their local community and saying, how can I make this a place where a noob, a beginner can show up, want to get involved around, want to get better. And we need so many more of those people to then grow the sport so we can have a pipeline to this, this top echelon of the sport, winning world championships and having these competitive players, having these, minted, elite observers or high level tournament directors and all these, fun sanctioned things and rankings. We need to have so much more at the bottom of the not the food chain, but just like the bottom of the skill level, right? Like we need more beginners who will want to watch, Roundnet on ESPN, who will want to, um, just watch a tournament and not actually play in it and buy spectator, tickets. Those are like the huge things we're missing. And some people do that really well in some parts of the country and some parts of the world, but by and large, it's like really, really not done. And it's because it's not sexy and because we don't really talk about it.
I would absolutely agree. I would say we need more people at the bottom, or not at the bottom, but at the start of the Roundnet journey, getting people's feet wet, like getting them in the door.
And like the way we both framed it, right? Like ultimately, there's a lot of, I don't know, hierarchical things in the world. And in my view, I try to do all the Roundnet things I do in a way that is like free of ego as best as I can. And I obviously fail at that if anybody's seen me do something egotistic, because I'm sure I have a lot. But I also try to remind myself that like it doesn't matter like if someone just started playing Roundnet or if someone's been playing for a long time. Like we all should want Roundnet to be bigger and better than it is. So getting on the same page about that. And then again, it's not that we need more people to be at the bottom of anything. It's more that we need more people involved in our community, because the bigger Roundnet is, the more engaged every little pocket of our community is, the more we can unlock doors and unlock opportunities. Like getting into the Olympics is like, one of the big ones, but there's so many other things that Roundnet could do if it had a player base, an audience that wants to watch it, that wants to spend on it, that we could do a lot of really fun things that, I'm sure everybody in their mind has like a pipe dream of what would be cool to see Roundnet do. So
yeah,
that's I try to spend a little bit of my time, as much as I'm matrixed across things, I try not to slack on showing up for my local community. And again, I feel like people maybe don't even know that I do that. So I try to remind people that if I can do it, then I think anybody can.
Yeah. What you said before makes me, it gave me a thought. We can work really hard to improve the quality of things, but if we stay exactly where we are or shrink in the amount, like in the population of the players, then we improve the quality for nothing. Like we need a good population sample size to know if what we're working on is actually working. To be honest, and
I was gonna say we do need to do both at the same time, right? Like we know that the sport needs to be improved in a lot of ways.
But I'm saying, yeah, you're right. You can't only have one. And that's why what you said is exactly true. We need more people at the beginning of the funnel, bringing people into the sport, bringing in more people that would watch it on ESPN and travel to tournaments, and maybe bring some money into the sport by doing so.
But I just think like the flood of money is like so much farther, and that's maybe a separate and longer conversation about like getting those expectations like in line. But just from like the scope of where we're discussing right now, like the work that we do, like volunteering and trying to grow and contribute to Roundnet, just getting that one person to pick up or playing in that park and like being like, putting up a sign to say, come play with us. It's like open to everybody. Those are the things that like, they don't scale in the most, sexy way versus like social media will get more people exposed around it, which is really important. But those human interactions, like, right, you said, we all belong to the Roundnet community because we have a human connection to it. I don't think there's anybody that feels connected around it in the same way because they only view it online. And so, having those experiences is so valuable.
I think we just need a few charismatic people in every single state to really bring more people in, and kind of just break the boundary of, the only people watching it on ESPN and understanding what's going on, and the only people that are spectating at tournaments or following along tournaments live are players, and that's a very small sample size. And so we definitely have to do more work with. It's so obvious and cliche, but like, you're absolutely right. We need to bring more people in at the beginning of their journey. Otherwise, all the work we're doing to grow the quality of the sport we're not going to see the full impact of it.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's just a really fun time for limited group of people. Which I have higher hopes for Roundnet than just that, but it is really fun.
Would you do all of the work if the population of Roundnet never grew.
Oh, would I do all of this stuff if Roundnet never grew?
Yeah. Or, I mean, probably
Like, would I
not, but I'm just like,
like would I do this all again if if Roundnet like never got any bigger than it is today?
yeah.
Mm, probably less of it, but
Yeah.
I think the real reason that I would do less of what I've done is more because um, I've just like done this as a hobby and just kept picking up things and haven't thought very hard. I think like the biggest shift I made over the past couple of years in my now 9+ year journey in Roundnet is um, if it started as just a fun thing and now it became more of like a commitment, and now I have like these side projects, and um, you could argue that I have like these small businesses that I run in Roundnet. I would argue that they are like non-businesses slash like volunteer enterprises. Some actually are volunteer enterprises too, like USA Roundnet. Um, like none of them I started because I wanted to really get much out of it other than have a fun time working on a project. The same way
Yeah.
anybody tinkers with something. Now that I'm doing these things that are received by this niche community in usually a pretty positive way, I think like the most like emblematic example being Round Network, because that's not like an in-person event thing that I do. It's everywhere in the world now. Is like now when I don't do Round Network stuff, or Albert doesn't do Round Network stuff, people say, "Where is Round Network?" And so that confusing expectation, am I just doing it for me versus or am I doing it for other people, is like a little more blurred. Because for me, I wanted to see if I could make better content, and I thought that would be fun, and I'd learn some stuff along the way. And now it becomes a question of like, oh, does Roundnet need this kind of production to be able to share out with the world and showcase our sport better to grow it? And that's a question that most people would say, yes, we need this production quality. We need like this content. We need these stories. And they say that very loudly and fervently. And then when you ask them, but do we really need it? Do we really want it? From a support fiscal side of things, the answer is like an adamant no. It is, I want this. I'm wondering where this is or when it's coming, but I also, I assume that it's getting funded some other way. And I think like that ties back to some of this like overall conversation on like Roundnet is a thing that we all have to build, and it's not just happening. It's not just magically getting funded. And if it were to get magically funded, like in the instance where Spikeball had $1 billion instead of millions of dollars as a company, them being able to spend on the sport would be nice from a laziness point of view, that we wouldn't have to put in our own blood, sweat, and tears. But yeah, this is like such a different conversation. But like us not having control over our own sport, I think would be like not worth the trade-off. That's like, for me at least, I'm talking to you, I guess, a ton about it, but it's like that's pretty much like why I do most stuff I do, is like trying to make Round a thing that we are in charge of, and not something that just goes to like the highest bidder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't figured out how to put that into a podcast yet.
One other thing I wanted to mention and ask you about is why you think it's so important that the people that are involved in the sport day to day are the ones that are controlling its future. Like, why do you think it's so important that the players are the ones to step up?
Yeah. Like I started playing Roundnet 9 years ago, and you know when I started, and still for more than half of the time I've been playing Roundnet, Spikeball, the company which has done a ton for the sport of Roundnet, was in charge of the rules, was in charge of deciding when and where the national championship was in the US. Initially, Spikeball was making the shots on, calling the shots on where the first world championship would be in Belgium before the pandemic. And then ultimately, we were able to build the IRF and pop up a lot more, national federations for Roundnet, which is really cool. But to speak to that point on like some of why I do Roundnet, I think why a lot of other people do Roundnet is, yes, to get to have fun experiences and just try out new things, but in particular, like the sport, I think should belong to everybody. I think Roundnet should be of, by, and for us, which is pretty, like American like type of dogma. But I think like in a lot of other countries, the communities are having to lead the work because they didn't have the backing of Spikeball 5-10 years ago. And so, yeah, like it's important that if we're not driving the sport forward, then one of two things is happening. It's either sitting still, which is a bummer, or a business or a company is going to push it forward, or an angel investor billionaire is going to push it forward, not necessarily in a bad way, but in a way that isn't answering, isn't accountable to the community. And of course, any business is accountable to their customers, but ultimately having structures and people in place to do things through the community and for the community, I think is a really important, but also hard thing to do and maintain. So that's where I sit on a lot of it.
Yeah.
If there's more to that question, it kind of gets weird, but that's kind of the gist for me.
Yeah. Just to add to that, if the people that care the most about the sport aren't trying to push it forward in the way that they see fit, then it'll end up being something that they don't want.
Yeah, I think
if we have our stuff together by the time, whenever this happens, if it ever happens, by the time we get financial resources, we'll already know what we want to turn it into. We will have an idea of what we want to do with those resources, instead of giving away control and turning it into something that wasn't the game that we fell in love with playing. So having control over the future of the sport, small or big, I think is crucial.
Yeah, and I'll just emphasize that perceived gap between saying you may care a lot about the sport, but also not that everybody has to volunteer a lot of time. I think one misnomer I try to put out is I shouldn't be volunteering as much as I volunteer. I think you should find one thing that you can do to contribute and do it well. And if you get excited about another thing, like I've gotten excited about other things, then go for it, jump in. But right now we say we want Roundnet to be a certain way. We say we want Roundnet to have certain things. But in the same vein, we don't do a lot of it. We don't actually take steps, or we don't ask what are the steps that I can maybe put in to make that happen. Ask what Roundnet can do for you versus what you can do for Roundnet, or flip those. And I don't know. I think this is really emblematic and consistent with what we've mentioned on just officiating as a through line for this conversation. But the not audacity, but I think just sometimes the irony of players when I'm running a tournament, or I just see it elsewhere, demanding to have an observer that's experienced, that's certified, trained up, and they themselves aren't interested in doing that, is such a just funny microcosm of wanting things from Roundnet and not wanting to give the very same thing you want from it.
It's a good example.
If you want to be part of pushing Roundnet forward with thoughtful conversations like this, follow me on Instagram, linked below. Really exciting announcement on a project I'm cooking up there, and I can't wait to be part of the conversation with you all. Peace.